The walker was dying. Carson Drake could hear it in the groaning metal, the hissing coolant lines, the way the whole frame shuddered like a wounded animal taking its last breaths. 30 seconds until the reactor went critical. Maybe less. He pulled harder. The unconscious warrior, pinned beneath the collapsed strut, wore armor he'd learned to fear over 7 years of war. Caith combat plate, elegant curves etched with energy circuits that still flickered weakly in the smoke. One gauntleted hand lay twisted at an angle that made Carson wince even now, even here, even though every tactical instinct screamed at him to run. 20 seconds. His engineering rig whined as he leveraged the hydraulic arm against the strut. The walker shifted. Not enough. He reset, braced his boots against scorched earth, and threw his weight into it. Metal shrieked. His ribs protested. The strut lifted 3 inches. 4. 5. Enough. Carson dropped the rig and grabbed the warrior's harness, hauling them clear just as the reactor housing cracked with a sound like breaking ice. He hit the ground, rolling the warrior's weight, crushing the air from his lungs, his vision going white at the edges. The walker exploded behind them. Heat washed over Carson's back. Debris rained down in burning fragments. His helmet's display flickered, died, came back showing critical warnings in angry red. He couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched ringing that felt like it was coming from inside his skull. When his vision cleared, he found himself staring at the warrior's face. Not a warrior, a woman. Young late 20s at most, with features that marked her as pure Caith bloodline. Silver hair spilled from beneath her cracked helmet. Her skin carried that faint luminescence he'd only seen in hollows of their aristocracy. High cheekbones, delicate nose, ears that swept back from her temples in graceful curves longer and more pronounced than the common soldiers. And unconscious, badly injured, probably dying. They say never touch Caith royalty, Carson thought distantly. I should have listened. 3 days ago, his recon squad had walked into an ambush in the Ashara Badlands. 17 soldiers, 17 friends, gone in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Plasma fire from positions that weren't supposed to exist. He'd survived by blind luck and the fact that he'd been checking a malfunctioning scanner 50 meters from the kill zone. He was supposed to be dead with them. Instead, he was here, alone, so behind enemy lines, cradling an unconscious Caith noble while the sky above Ashara 4 lit up with distant orbital fire. The ringing in his ears faded. New sounds filtered through. The crackle of flames, the groan of settling debris, and something else, something that made his blood turn to ice water. Engines, multiple. Getting closer. Carson's hand went to his sidearm, then stopped. What was he going to do? Shoot at dropships with a pistol? He'd seen what Caith military response looked like. He'd be vapor before he cleared leather. The woman stirred in his arms. Her eyes fluttered, opened. They were the color of Arctic ice under sunlight, pale blue with flecks of silver that seemed to catch and reflect the firelight. For a moment, they focused on nothing. Then they found his face, sharpened, widened. Her hands shot up, caught his throat, and Carson suddenly couldn't breathe. Caith, she rasped. Her voice carried an accent he'd heard before, musical and clipped. You are human. Carson nodded, tried to anyway. Her grip was crushing his windpipe. You pulled me from the walker. Another nod. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. Why? He managed to force out 2 words. Can't. Leave. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, more like calculation. Assessment. She held his gaze for another 3 seconds, then released him. Carson collapsed forward, gasping, one hand braced on the ground beside her head. She watched him struggle to breathe with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. You should have run, she said. Probably. Carson's voice came out rough. Wouldn't have made it far anyway. The dropships broke through the smoke layer, 3 of them massive and angular, painted in the midnight blue of Caith military. They descended like falling mountains, engines so loud Carson felt them in his chest. Landing gear deployed with hydraulic precision. Ramps dropped before they'd fully touched down. Soldiers poured out. Not the standard infantry Carson had faced in countless skirmishes. These wore armor trimmed in gold, moved with the fluid grace of elite units, carried weapons that hummed with enough power to level buildings. Royal Guard if his briefings were accurate. The kind of troops that protected high-value assets. The kind that protected royalty. Oh, Carson thought. Oh no. A massive soldier, easily 7 feet tall with a helmet crowned in ceremonial ridges, strode directly toward them. His rifle was aimed at Carson's chest, but his eyes, visible through the helmet's visor, were fixed on the woman. Princess Lyron. The soldier's voice carried absolute authority. Are you injured, Princess? Of course she was. Functional General Arctis. Lyron pushed herself into a sitting position, moving like every muscle hurt. The human saved my life. The rifle didn't waver. We will execute him quickly then, as a mercy. No. The word cut through the settling smoke like a blade. Every soldier within earshot froze. Carson could practically feel the weight of their attention shift to Lyron. She climbed to her feet, swaying slightly. Carson started to reach out to steady her, then thought better of it and let his hand drop. She noticed. Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. The human will not be harmed, Lyron continued. He risked his life to pull me from the wreckage while under fire. That debt will be honored. General Arctis lowered his rifle fractionally. Princess, he is enemy military. Protocol requires you follow my orders, General. Ice crept into Lyron's voice. Or have you forgotten who commands the 7th Fleet? A long silence. Then Arctis inclined his head. As you command, Princess. Take him aboard the Sovereign. Secure quarters, not detention. Ensure he receives medical attention. Lyron turned to look at Carson directly. Her pale eyes seemed to see straight through him. You saved my life, human. I will not forget. She walked toward the nearest dropship without looking back. Soldiers parted around her like water around stone. Arctis gestured, and 4 guards moved to flank Carson, weapons ready, but not quite aimed. Move, one of them said. Carson moved. What else was he going to do? He was one human engineer, injured and exhausted, surrounded by the most elite military force in this sector of space. Running would be suicide. Fighting would be a waste of everyone's time. So he walked up the ramp into the dropship, flanked by soldiers who could kill him without breaking stride, and tried not to think about what his commanding officers would say when they found out he'd been captured by the enemy. If they ever found out. If he ever saw another human again. The ramp sealed behind him with a hiss of pressurization. The deck beneath his feet thrummed with barely restrained power. Through the small viewport, he watched a Sherifor's scorched landscape drop away as the dropship lifted off, joining its companions in a tight formation that punched through the atmosphere like thrown daggers. Carson sat on the bench where the guards directed him and closed his eyes. His ribs ached. His hands were shaking from adrenaline crash. 3 days ago, he'd watched his entire squad die. Now he was a prisoner of the Caith Dominion aboard a ship heading to who knew where. His survival depended on the goodwill of a princess who'd almost strangled him for saving her life. It could be worse, he thought. Then he stopped because, historically, every time he thought that the universe took it as a challenge. The transit to the Sovereign took an hour. Carson spent it in silence, watching the guards who watched him. They didn't speak, didn't relax, barely seemed to blink. Professional soldiers at the peak of their craft, and he was cargo they'd been ordered not to break. When the dropship docked, they escorted him through corridors that made human military vessels look like scrap metal held together with tape. Everything gleamed, walls of some translucent material that seemed to generate its own soft light, floors smooth as glass, energy conduits running in artistic patterns along the ceiling, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat. Beautiful, elegant, utterly alien. The guards stopped at a door that opened without being touched. The room beyond was larger than Carson's entire quarters back at base. A sleeping platform that looked more comfortable than anything he'd used in 7 years. A viewport showing the stars. Furniture in flowing shapes that seemed grown rather than built. Medical team will arrive shortly, one guard said. Do not attempt to leave. The door closed. Carson stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how filthy he was. Dust and blood and smoke covered every surface of his uniform. He probably smelled like burning metal and fierce sweat. He found what might have been a bathroom. The fixtures responded to his proximity water flowing from sources he couldn't identify. It took him 20 minutes to figure out how to make it warm, but eventually he managed a shower that stripped away 3 days of accumulated trauma. The medical team arrived while he was still toweling off. Two Caith in white robes who moved with calm efficiency, scanning him with devices that hummed softly, their hands gentle but impersonal. They reset his ribs with something that felt like ice and fire, sealed the cuts on his hands, applied a patch to his neck where Lyron had grabbed him. They didn't speak except to each other in a language that sounded like water over stones. Carson let them work. When they finished, they bowed slightly and left. He was alone again. 3 weeks passed in that room, 3 weeks of isolation broken only by medical checks and meal deliveries. No interrogation, no demands, no explanation, just silence in the endless stars beyond the viewport. Carson exercised to keep from going crazy, push-ups until his arms shook, running in place until his lungs burned, mental math problems, reciting every engineering manual he'd memorized, anything to keep his mind from fracturing, under the weight of questions he couldn't answer. Why was he alive? What did they want? Where was the ship going? What happened to Princess Lyron? Was the war still happening? Did anyone know he wasn't dead? On the 21st day, the door opened. General Arctus stood in the corridor, flanked by 6 guards in ceremonial armor. "The princess requests your presence, human. You will come." Not a request then. Carson stood, smoothed his uniform. They'd provided Caith military fatigues that almost fit, and followed. The corridors became grander, more ornate. They passed other Caith who stopped to stare, their long ears tilting forward in curiosity. Carson kept his eyes forward and his shoulders straight. If he was walking to his execution, he'd do it like a soldier. They entered a vast chamber. Not the ship anymore, he realized. They must have docked somewhere while he slept. The ceiling soared 40 feet above, supported by columns that seemed carved from single pieces of crystal. Walls that shifted between translucent and opaque, showing glimpses of a city beyond that defied description. Bridges of light connecting floating platforms. Spires that touched clouds. This was Kalios, the Caith homeworld, their capital, and at the far end of the chamber, elevated on steps of pale stone, sat the throne. The throne room held hundreds, maybe thousands. Caith nobles in formal attire that made human dress uniforms look like work clothes. They lined balconies in ascending tiers, all of them silent, all of them watching him. Carson's boots echoed on the polished floor. Each step felt like it took a year. The guard stopped 20 feet from the throne steps and stepped aside, leaving him alone in a pool of light from sources he couldn't identify. On the throne sat a woman who radiated power like a star radiated heat. Queen Nery, if his briefings had any truth to them. Taller than Lyron, with the same delicate features, aged into something sharp and timeless. Her hair was silver, shot through with threads that gleamed like starlight. Her robes moved like liquid shadow. Her eyes, the same pale blue as her daughter's, held an intelligence that made Carson feel like an insect under a microscope. Standing to the right of the throne, dressed in armor of midnight blue, trimmed with gold, was Princess Lyron. She looked at Carson without expression, without acknowledgement, like she'd never seen him before. An advisor stepped forward, tall and thin, with robes that dragged the floor. "Sergeant Carson Drake of the Terran Alliance," the advisor announced in perfect human standard. "You stand before Her Imperial Majesty, Queen Nery, the eternal sovereign of the Caith Dominion, protector of the 17 worlds, bearer of the..." Carson tuned out the titles. They went on for at least a minute. He kept his attention on Nery, trying to read anything in that ancient, beautiful face. When the advisor finally finished, silence fell like a hammer. Nery leaned forward slightly. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber without effort. "You are the human who pulled my daughter from the battlefield." It wasn't a question, but Carson answered anyway. "Yes, Your Majesty." "You acted against the interests of your own military." "I acted according to my conscience, Your Majesty." A ripple of murmurs spread through the watching nobles. Nery raised one hand and the sound died instantly. "You saved her life." "I tried not to let her die. There's a difference." Lyron's eyes shifted to him. Still no expression, but he saw something flicker behind the ice. Amusement, irritation. He couldn't tell. Nery stood. The movement drew every eye in the chamber. She descended 3 steps close enough now that Carson could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the only sign that this woman was anything less than ageless. "For that act," Nery said clearly, "you will be rewarded." Relief tried to flood through Carson's chest. He crushed it down. He'd learned long ago not to trust relief. Thank you, Your Majesty. Nery smiled. It was a beautiful smile, terrifying. You will marry my daughter and give me strong grandchildren human. The words hit Carson like physical blows. He blinked, once, twice, processed what he'd heard, searched for the joke, the diplomatic phrasing he'd misunderstood, the translation error. Found nothing. A laugh bubbled up his throat before he could stop it. Not polite, not diplomatic. A genuine surprised laugh at the sheer absurdity of what he'd just heard. The chamber went silent. Not the respectful silence of before, the shocked silence of several hundred people who'd just watched someone laugh at their immortal queen. Nery's smile didn't waver. You find this amusing? Carson cut himself off. Looked at Lyron. She was staring at him now, her expression unreadable. Looked at the hundreds of watching nobles. Looked at Nery, who stood 3 steps above him with the patient attention of someone observing an interesting experiment. You're serious, Carson said slowly. I do not jest in matters of state. Your Majesty, Carson tried to find words that wouldn't get him executed. I appreciate the generous offer. It is not an offer, it is a command. Something cold settled in Carson's stomach. He'd spent 7 years taking orders, following commands, doing what he was told because that was what soldiers did. He'd watched friends die because someone higher up the chain had decided their deaths served a purpose. He was tired of commands. No, Carson said. The silence that followed was absolute. He could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the whisper of air through the chamber's ventilation, could hear several hundred Caith collectively holding their breath. Nery tilted her head fractionally. You refuse, yes, Your Majesty. You refuse an alliance that would grant you wealth status and the protection of the Caith dominion. I refuse a marriage without choice. Carson met her gaze, refusing to look away. For either of us. A guard moved. Carson heard the hum of an energy weapon powering up. He didn't turn, didn't flinch. If he was going to die, he'd die standing. Nery raised her hand. The hum died. Explain. Marriage should be something both people choose. The words came easier now. Not something commanded, not a transaction, not a political alliance dressed up as something else. He glanced at Lyron. Your daughter saved my life by refusing to let them execute me. I won't repay them by forcing her into a marriage she doesn't want. Lyron's eyes widened fractionally, the first real reaction he'd seen from her. Nery studied him in silence. 10 seconds, 20, 30. The entire chamber waited. Then the queen of the Caith dominion did something Carson hadn't expected. She smiled. Not the terrifying diplomatic smile from before. Something real, something almost approving. You possess unusual courage, human. Or unusual stupidity. I've been told it's hard to tell the difference. A sound rippled through the chamber, laughter, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. Lyron pressed her lips together, fighting something. Carson couldn't tell if she wanted to laugh or strangle him. Nery descended the final steps until she stood level with Carson. Up close, she was easily 7 inches taller than him. You misunderstand my intentions. That's extremely possible, Your Majesty. I do not offer marriage as mere reward. Nery began to pace slow and deliberate. The Caith value strength, not merely physical power, but resilience, adaptability, the will to survive against impossible odds. Carson said nothing. He had a feeling this was going somewhere he wouldn't like. Humans possess these qualities in remarkable concentration. Nery turned to face him. You survived 3 major engagements against Caith forces. You pulled my daughter from beneath a war machine while under fire. You stand before me now, refusing a command that could see you executed because you believe in the principle of choice. Your Majesty, a union between you and my daughter would produce offspring combining the strengths of both species. Nery spoke as if discussing a construction project. Strategic, necessary, logical. Carson stared at her. You're talking about children like this is a breeding program. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even Lyron looked shocked. Nery's eyes gleamed. I am talking about the future of 2 species human. Nothing less. With respect, Your Majesty, being described as excellent genetic stock is not the romantic compliment you think it is. The throne room exploded into chaos. Nobles shouted. Guards moved forward. An advisor looked like they might faint. And Carson Princess Lyron of the Caith dominion turned away and covered her mouth with one hand. She was laughing, trying desperately not to, but definitely laughing. Carson looked at her. She looked back. Their eyes met. For just a moment, he saw past the ice and the armor, and the princess standing in her mother's throne room. He saw a woman his own age who'd been told her entire life what to be, what to do, who to marry. A woman who'd never been asked what she wanted, just like him. Nery raised both hands. Silence crashed down like a physical force. She looked at Carson, then at Lyron, then back to Carson. "You refuse my command," the queen said softly. "You challenge centuries of tradition. You stand in my throne room and call my proposal a breeding program." "Yes, your majesty." "And you do this, why exactly?" Carson took a breath. "Because marriage should be a choice. Because your daughter deserves better than being commanded into a political alliance. Because I'd rather face whatever punishment you decree than spend my life in a relationship neither of us chose." Nery stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned to Lyron. "Daughter, you have been silent. Speak." Every eye in the chamber turned to the princess. Lyron's hands, Carson noticed, were clenched at her sides. Her jaw was tight. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but edged with something he couldn't identify. "The human is correct, mother." More gasps. Nery's eyebrows rose fractionally. Lyron continued, "Forcing someone to marry me would be," she paused, choosing words carefully, "extremely unpleasant for both parties. You would refuse my command as well. I would refuse to participate in a farce." Lyron lifted her chin. "You taught me that strength comes from will, not from obligation. This human demonstrated more will in 2 minutes than I've seen from a century of courtiers offering themselves for political advantage." Carson felt his estimation of Princess Lyron shift dramatically. Nery looked between them. "Interesting," she murmured. Then louder to the entire court, "This audience is concluded. The human will remain as a guest of the Dominion while I consider this matter." She turned and ascended the throne steps without another word. Advisors rushed to follow. Nobles began filing out their conversations, a rising buzz of speculation and shock. Guards moved toward Carson. He stood his ground, watching as Lyron remained motionless beside the throne. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not quite approval, not quite curiosity. Recognition, maybe. One person seeing themselves reflected in another. Then she turned and followed her mother into the depths of the palace, and Carson was alone with guards who probably wanted to kill him in a future that had just become infinitely more complicated. "They say never touch Caith royalty," he thought again, but they never said what happened after. The quarters they assigned Carson were different this time. Larger, windows that overlooked the city of Kalios, all spires and flowing architecture that seemed to defy physics. Furniture that adjusted to his weight without being asked. A bathroom that anticipated his needs before he knew them himself. A gilded cage, but still a cage. He stood at the window as the twin suns set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Somewhere in this vast palace, Queen Nery was deciding his fate. Somewhere Princess Lyron was doing what? Regretting speaking up, preparing to correct her mistake. Carson had learned long ago that hope was dangerous. It made you careless. Made you forget that the universe didn't care about fairness or justice, or whether you deserved a second chance. But he'd also learned that giving up was worse. The door chimed. He turned as it slid open, expecting guards or perhaps another medical team. Princess Lyron stood in the doorway alone. She'd changed from her formal armor into something simpler. Still elegant, still unmistakably royal, but without the ceremonial weight. Her silver hair was unbound, falling past her shoulders. Without the throne room's harsh light, Carson could see the faint luminescence of her skin, the way her eyes caught and held the sunset's colors. She was objectively the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, which made the situation approximately 10 times more uncomfortable. "May I enter?" Lyron asked. "It's your palace. It's your quarters." She stepped inside anyway. The door closed behind her. That was not an answer. Carson gestured to the seating area. "Please." She settled into a chair with the unconscious grace of someone who'd been trained in etiquette since birth. Carson took the chair opposite, maintaining a careful distance. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You embarrassed my mother," Lyron finally said. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did." The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. "That's what makes it interesting." Carson studied her. In the throne room, she'd been ice and distance. Now alone, something had shifted. Not warmth exactly, but the cold had receded. "I spoke the truth," he said. "If that's embarrassing, maybe the truth needed saying." "No one speaks truth to power, not like that." "I'm nobody. I can afford to be honest." Lyron tilted her head, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as calculation. You're a decorated combat engineer. 3 commendations for valor. Survivor of the Ashara massacre. Holder of 2 patents for field repair techniques that your military adopted fleet-wide. She paused. You are not nobody, Carson Drake. He shouldn't have been surprised she'd done research. Of course she had. How much of my file did you read? All of it. No apology in her voice. You lost your entire squad 3 years ago. 17 people. You were the ranking officer. You blamed yourself. The old wound opened fresh. Carson kept his face neutral. I was responsible for them. The ambush was perfectly executed. No intelligence suggested enemy presence in that sector. The inquiry cleared you of any negligence. Inquiries can say whatever they want. Doesn't bring them back. Lyron was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened fractionally. Is that why you saved me trying to balance some cosmic ledger? No. Carson met her eyes. I saved you because leaving you there felt wrong, simple as that. Nothing is that simple. This was. She studied him with those pale eyes that seemed to see too much. You really believe that? Marriage should be a choice, that both parties should consent, that forced unions are wrong regardless of political benefit. Yes, even if that choice could end the war, save millions of lives. Carson leaned forward, especially then, because a peace built on forced marriage isn't peace, it's just a prettier cage. And eventually someone breaks out. Lyron stood abruptly, moving to the window. She stared out at her city hands clasped behind her back. I was raised to be a weapon, she said quietly. From the age of 5, combat training, strategic studies, telepathic discipline, everything designed to make me useful to the Dominion. Carson said nothing. He recognized the shape of this conversation, the need to speak something that had been held too long. My mother loves me, Lyron continued. I know this, but love and duty are complicated for queens who've ruled for 5 centuries. She sees patterns we can't, plans and timescales that make individual lives seem insignificant. That doesn't make it right. No, Lyron turned to face him. It doesn't, but it makes it understandable. Understanding why someone does something wrong doesn't make it less wrong. A genuine smile crossed her face, brief but real. You're very stubborn. I've been told. It's going to get you killed one day. Probably. Carson stood, moving to join her at the window, careful to maintain distance, aware of every protocol he was probably violating. But at least I'll die honest. Lyron looked at him, really looked, not the assessing gaze of before, but something more direct, more personal. My mother won't give up. She sees a value in this union. She'll find other ways to pressure us. Let her try. She could make your life very difficult. It's already difficult. I'm a prisoner on an alien world. My own people probably think I'm dead, and I just refused the most powerful woman in the galaxy. Carson shrugged. How much worse can it get? Lyron laughed. The sound was unexpected, unguarded, and transformed her face entirely. You truly don't understand what you've done, do you? Enlighten me. You've made yourself interesting. She sobered, and my mother finds very few things interesting anymore. Before Carson could respond, his door chimed again. This time when it opened, General Arctus stood there with 4 guards. Princess, Arctus bowed slightly, your presence is requested in the war room. Human. He looked at Carson. You will come as well. Lyron and Carson exchanged glances. Both of us, Lyron asked. Queen's orders. The war room was exactly what it sounded like. A circular chamber dominated by a holographic display showing star systems in miniature. Tactical overlays. Fleet positions. Border zones. Carson recognized some of the markings from his own military briefings, though from the opposite perspective. Queen Nery stood at the display's center, manipulating data with gestures that seemed almost casual. 3 advisors flanked her, including the thin one who'd announced titles in the throne room. Mother, Lyron said, you summoned us. I did. Nery gestured, and the display zoomed in on a neutral zone between human and Caith space. 3 diplomatic delegations are scheduled to meet here in 2 weeks. Final negotiations for the ceasefire treaty. Carson saw where this was going. You want me there? I want both of you there. Nery looked between them. It's proof that cooperation is possible. I'm not a diplomat, Carson said. You're a symbol. That's more valuable. Nery brought up images of the delegates. Human faces Carson didn't recognize. Caith nobles in formal attire. Both sides have factions that want this war to continue. They'll be looking for any excuse to collapse negotiations. And you think having us stand together will prevent that? I think, Nery said carefully, that if a human engineer and a Caith princess can work together despite 7 years of war, it makes it harder for zealots to claim cooperation is impossible. Lyron frowned. You're using us as political theater. I'm using every tool I have to prevent more bloodshed. Nery's voice hardened. Millions have died. Millions more will if this fails. If parading you two in front of cameras saves even a fraction of those lives, I'll do it without hesitation. The room fell silent. Carson looked at the holographic display, at the neat tactical markers that represented fleets and armies and billions of lives. It was easy to forget in the abstract what war actually meant. The smell of burning metal, the sound friends made when they died, the weight of guilt that never quite lifted. What exactly would this involve? He asked. Nery gestured. The display shifted to show a conference facility. 2 weeks of negotiations. You would attend select sessions, dinners, public appearances. You would demonstrate that former enemies can become allies. We're not allies, Lyron said flatly. We barely know each other. Then you'll have 2 weeks to change that. Carson caught something in Nery's tone. A calculation. This wasn't just about peace talks. This was another test. Another way to force him and Lyron together. And if we refuse, he asked, you won't. Nery looked at him directly. Because despite your defiance, Carson Drake, you're a soldier who understands duty. And you know that refusing this helps no one. She was right. Carson hated that she was right. But he'd seen too much war to let pride stand in the way of peace. I'll do it, he said. Lyron turned to him sharply. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He met her eyes. Not because your mother commanded it. Because it's the right thing to do. Something shifted in Lyron's expression. Then I will as well. Nery smiled. Excellent. You leave in 3 days. General Arctis will coordinate security. Dismissed. As they left the war room, Lyron fell into step beside Carson. The guards maintained a discreet distance. You realize she's manipulating us, Lyron said quietly. Obviously. You went along anyway. Because she's right. Carson glanced at her. If this helps end the war, isn't it worth it? Perhaps. Lyron was quiet for a moment. But don't mistake my mother's intentions. She still wants that marriage. This is just another approach. Let her want. I've been saying no to commands my whole career. Have you? Lyron's tone was wry. That's not what your file says. Then my file's incomplete. They reached a junction where the corridors split. Lyron paused, studying him with that same assessing gaze. I misjudged you, she said finally. In the throne room, I thought you were simply reckless. Now I think you might be something more dangerous. What's that principled? She said it like a diagnosis. Good night, Carson Drake. She walked away, guards materializing from nowhere to escort her. Carson watched her go, then headed back to his own quarters alone. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Briefings on Caith diplomatic protocol, fittings for formal clothing that felt like wearing someone else's skin, security sweeps and background checks, and endless questions from people who seemed to think he was either a spy or an idiot. Maybe both. He saw Lyron only in passing, always surrounded by advisors, always busy, always maintaining that careful distance. But once crossing a corridor, their eyes met. She nodded slightly. He returned it. Not friends, not allies, but something. The transport to the neutral zone was a Caith diplomatic vessel, all sleek lines and quiet luxury. Carson stood at the observation deck watching the stars blur past at faster-than-light speeds when Lyron joined him. Can't sleep, she asked. Not used to ships this smooth. Human vessels shake like they're held together with hope and profanity. She almost smiled. I've read reports of your engineering. Apparently that's not far from the truth. We make do with what we have. Lyron moved to stand beside him at the viewport, close enough that he could smell something like frost and starlight. That's what my mother meant, about humans. You adapt, improvise, refuse to accept limitations. Is that a compliment? An observation? She paused. We're going to be under intense scrutiny for 2 weeks. Both sides will be watching for any sign of weakness or deception. I know. We should establish parameters, boundaries. Agreed. Carson turned to face her. No touching unless absolutely required by protocol. No pretending to be something we're not. Honest answers to direct questions within security limits. And if someone asks about the marriage proposal, we tell the truth. Your mother proposed it. We both refused. End of story. Lyron nodded slowly. That will disappoint many people. Good. Let them be disappointed. You really don't care, do you, about what powerful people think? Carson considered that. I care about doing what's right. If powerful people happen to agree, great. If not, he shrugged, they can join the line of everyone else who's been disappointed in me. That's a long line, I imagine. You have no idea. This time Lyron did smile. I'm beginning to. The conference facility occupied an entire asteroid hollowed out and converted into a neutral meeting ground. Vast halls, observation domes showing the starfield. Separate wings for each delegation carefully designed to prevent accidental contact. Carson and Lyron were assigned adjacent suites. The message was clear. Together but separate. A symbol but not a reality. The first session was a formal dinner. 50 delegates from both sides arranged at tables designed by people who'd probably calculated every sightline for maximum political advantage. Carson wore Caith formal attire, dark blue, with subtle energy circuits, feeling like a fraud. Lyron arrived in traditional warrior regalia armor, polished to mirror brightness, looking like she could conquer galaxies. When she saw him, something flickered in her eyes. You clean up adequately, she said. You look like you could kill everyone in this room. I could. I believe you. They walked in together. Conversation stopped. Every head turned. Carson could feel the weight of assumptions, judgments, calculations. Let them look. The dinner was excruciating. 7 courses of alien food that Carson couldn't identify. Speeches that went on forever. Careful diplomatic language that said nothing while implying everything. He sat next to Lyron, acutely aware of every gesture. When he reached for a glass, she moved her hand at the same moment. Their fingers brushed. She pulled back like she'd been burned. Sorry, he muttered. Don't apologize. We're being watched. She was right. Cameras, observers, people whose entire job was reading body language and reporting back to their masters. Carson took a deliberate sip of water. How long does this normally last? Hours. Lyron's voice was barely a murmur. Standard diplomatic practice is to bore opponents into submission. Is it working? I've attended formal dinners since I was 12. State functions, treaty negotiations, victory celebrations. She paused. I've learned to endure. Carson was quiet for a moment. That's a long time to smile through things you hate. He paused. How old are you? 28, by your calendar. She glanced at him. Does that bother you? Should it? Many humans expect princesses to be younger, more delicate, decorative. Carson thought about that. You've commanded fleets and survived battles. Age isn't what makes someone dangerous. No, a slight smile. Will is. Lyron was quiet for a moment. You lost 17 people. Your entire squad. Yes. How old were you? 32. Close to my age now. She stared at her plate. I led my first military campaign at 25. Lost 12 ships. 2,000 souls. I remember every name. Carson looked at her. Really looked. Saw past the princess, the warrior, the symbol. Saw someone who carried the same weight he did. The same guilt. The same scars. Does it get easier? He asked quietly. No, but you learn to carry it better. A human delegate 3 tables over stood to make a toast. Carson forced himself to pay attention, to smile in the right places, to pretend this performance mattered. When it finally ended 4 hours later, he and Lyron walked back to their suites in silence. At her door, she paused. Tomorrow there's a demonstration, she said. Ancient Caith technology, one of the symposium centerpieces. Sounds fascinating. It hasn't worked in 2 centuries. Our best engineers can't repair it. She looked at him directly. I've arranged for you to attend. Understanding clicked. You want me to try fixing it? I want to see if human improvisation is as effective as the reports claim. And if I can't, then I'll have wasted an afternoon and given the warmongers proof that human Caith cooperation is impossible. Her expression was carefully neutral. High stakes for a broken machine. No pressure then. None at all. A ghost of a smile. But I don't think you'll fail. She disappeared into her quarters. Carson stood in the corridor for a moment, processing. This was another test, another layer to Nery's manipulation. Push them together. Create situations where they had to cooperate. See if chemistry developed naturally. He should be angry, should refuse. But he'd never been able to resist a broken machine. The demonstration hall was packed. Delegates, observers, media. At the center, on a raised platform, sat what looked like a crystalline sphere about 3 feet in diameter. Energy conduits ran through its structure in patterns that made Carson's engineering sense itch. A Caith technician was explaining its function. something about resonance fields and harmonic amplification. Carson understood maybe half of it, but he recognized the problem immediately. The conduits were misaligned, not by much, fractions of a degree, but enough to break the resonance pattern. When the technician tried to activate it, nothing happened. Polite applause from the audience, disappointed murmurs. Lyron appeared at Carson's elbow. "Well, Poyo, the conduits," he said. "They're out of alignment. Our engineers have tested every component, all within acceptable parameters." Acceptable isn't the same as correct. Carson moved forward, drawn despite himself. "May I?" The technician looked offended. Lyron nodded permission. Carson circled the device, examining joints, checking connections. Every Caith engineer in the room was watching him now. He could feel their skepticism, their certainty that this human had no idea what he was doing. Maybe they were right. He found the access panel, opened it with hands that knew machines better than people. Inside the crystal matrix was beautiful, elegant, precise, and wrong. "Here, Comandant," he pointed. "This conduit should be 0.03 degrees off-axis, not 0.03. Someone misread the specifications." The chief engineer leaned in, checked calculations on a tablet, went pale. "He's correct." It took 10 minutes to realign. The entire hall watched in silence. When Carson closed the panel and stepped back, the device began to glow. Soft at first, then brighter resonance building, until the whole sphere sang with barely contained energy. Applause erupted, real this time, amazed. Carson stepped away, uncomfortable with attention. Lyron materialized beside him, guiding him out of the crowd. "How did you know?" she asked. "I didn't. Not for certain, but precision engineering follows certain rules. Your people are better at it than humans, which means when something doesn't work, it's usually because someone was too precise, followed the manual exactly instead of understanding the underlying principle. And humans, we're bad at following manuals, so we learn to understand principles." He shrugged. "Works about half the time." Lyron laughed. "Half the time? And you call that an advantage? Better than being right 0% of the time." They'd reached a quiet corridor, away from crowds, away from cameras. Lyron stopped, turning to face him. "Thank you," she said. "That was impressive." "It was basic engineering." "No, it was seeing what everyone else missed." She hesitated, then added, "You do that often, I think." Before Carson could respond, the lights flickered, then went out entirely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Alarms blared. Lyron's hand went to her waist where a weapon would normally hang. "Stay behind me," she ordered. "What's happening?" "I don't." The shot came from nowhere. A crackling bolt of energy that would have taken Carson's head off if Lyron hadn't slammed him sideways. They hit the ground hard. The bolt scorched the wall where he'd been standing. More shots. Multiple attackers. Lyron rolled to her feet, hand outstretched. The air around them shimmered. Carson felt pressure, like being underwater. Telepathic shield, he realized. "Run," Lyron shouted. Instead, Carson scrambled behind her, searching for cover, for weapons, for anything. His fingers found a fallen piece of the corridor ceiling. Metal. Heavy. A figure emerged from the smoke. Human. Wearing civilian clothes but moving like military. Rifle aimed. Carson threw the metal. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't precise, but it hit the shooter's weapon, knocking their aim wide. The next shot went high. Lyron lunged forward. Even without a weapon, she was devastating. 3 moves and the attacker was unconscious. "There's more," Carson said. "I know." Lyron grabbed the fallen rifle, checked the charge. "Security will be here soon. We just need 2 more attackers." Caith this time. Both armed. One aimed at Lyron, the other at Carson. Time slowed. Carson saw it all. Saw the triggers squeeze. Saw Lyron turn toward him, eyes wide. Saw her telepathic shield flare, trying to cover them both. Wouldn't be enough. Carson moved without thinking. Threw himself at Lyron, knocking her down, covering her body with his. Pain exploded across his back. The energy bolt burned through his jacket, seared flesh. He gasped, vision going white. The second shot never came. Security forces flooded the corridor, weapons blazing. The attackers went down or fled, shouting. Chaos. Lyron was saying something. Carson couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. He tried to get up, couldn't make his body obey. She rolled him gently onto his side. Her face filled his vision. Those pale eyes wide now with something that might have been fear. "You idiot," she said. "You stupid, selfless idiot." Seemed fair. Words were hard. "You saved me first." Her hands were glowing faintly, telepathic energy flowing into him. The pain receded slightly. Don't talk. Medical teams are coming. Attackers. Human and Caith both. Working together? Her jaw tightened. Someone wants this piece to fail badly enough to kill for it. Carson tried to focus. Failed. The world was getting fuzzy at the edges. Stay with me, Lyron commanded. Not a request. An order backed by royal authority and something else. Something personal. Trying, he managed. Medical teams arrived, hands lifting him. Lyron's voice giving orders in clipped tones. Movement, light, pain, then darkness. When Carson woke, he was in a medical bay. Caith technology hummed around him, knitting flesh and bone with precision human medicine couldn't match. Lyron sat in a chair beside his bed, still in her damaged armor, dried blood on her hands. How long? His voice cracked. 6 hours. She didn't move. You took an energy bolt meant for me. The doctor said another inch and it would have severed your spine. But it didn't. No thanks to your survival instinct. She finally looked at him. Why did you do that? You know why. Say it. Carson met her eyes. Because I wasn't going to let you die. We barely know each other. Doesn't matter. I'm Caith. Enemy. No. Carson pushed himself up slightly, ignoring the protest from his back. You're the woman who saved my life, who stood up to her mother, who laughed when I fixed a machine. That's what matters. Lyron was silent for a long moment. My mother was right about one thing. What's that? Humans are dangerous. She stood moved to the bedside. Not because you're strong, because you refuse to stop caring even when caring could kill you. Is that a bad thing? I don't know yet. She reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand over his. Her skin was cool. The contact sent a tingle through his nerves. But I'm beginning to understand why my mother finds you interesting. Carson looked at their joined hands. Lyron wept. Rest. She pulled away. Security is investigating. Both our delegations are in an uproar. Accusations flying in every direction. My mother is en route. Perfect. Indeed. Lyron moved toward the door, paused. Carson. Yeah. Thank you for not dying. Then she was gone, leaving him alone with machines that sang quiet songs of healing and questions that had no easy answers. Someone had tried to kill them. Human and Caith working together, which meant the threat to peace was worse than anyone had admitted. And somewhere in the chaos, Carson had crossed a line he hadn't meant to cross. Stopped seeing Lyron as just a princess or a symbol. Started seeing her as someone worth protecting, which given everything was probably going to make life much more complicated. But then again, when had his life ever been simple? The medical bay's ceiling was white, perfectly sterile white. Carson stared at it for 3 hours while his body healed and his mind replayed the attack. Human and Caith shooters working together. Coordinated. Professional. Someone wanted this piece dead badly enough to risk everything. Queen Nery arrived at dawn. She swept into the medical bay like a storm made flesh, advisors scrambling in her wake. Lyron was already there, had barely left since the attack. She stood when her mother entered, shoulders tight. Mother. Daughter. Nery's gaze swept the room, settled on Carson. You live. Disappointed. The words came out before Carson could stop them. Lyron inhaled sharply. The advisors looked ready to intervene. Nery raised one hand and silence fell like a hammer. No, she said quietly, relieved. That surprised him more than the attack had. Nery dismissed the advisors with a gesture. When the door closed, she moved to stand at the foot of Carson's bed. Her expression was unreadable, ancient and calculating. I knew, she said. Lyron went very still. Knew what? About the assassination plot. Nery's voice carried no emotion, no regret. Intelligence intercepted communications 2 weeks before I sent you to the conference. Warmonger factions on both sides, planning to eliminate key peace advocates. The silence that followed was absolute. Carson felt something cold settle in his chest. You knew, he said slowly, and you sent us anyway. I sent you because of it. Nery looked between them. The conspiracy ran deep. Senators, military commanders, people I'd trusted for decades. I needed proof, needed them to reveal themselves. You used us as bait. Lyron's voice was ice. Your own daughter. I used every asset I had to prevent civil war. Nery's composure cracked slightly. If the warmongers succeeded, both sides would have torn themselves apart. Billions dead. Centuries of conflict. So you risked 2 lives instead. Carson pushed himself upright, ignoring the pain. Calculated casualties. Yes. No apology. No justification, just fact. I risked you because I believed you would survive. And you did. Lyron was shaking. Carson could see it in her hands tightly clenched at her sides. You could have warned us. If I had, you would have acted differently. The conspirators would have known. Nerys's eyes were hard. I made the choice no one else could. The mathematics of survival. Mathematics. Carson's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call gambling with your daughter's life? I call it ruling. Nerys turned to face him fully. You cannot understand human. 5 centuries of decisions. Millions of choices where every option costs lives. You learn to calculate. To choose the path that saves the most, even when it breaks your heart. Mother, Lyron's voice cracked. I trusted you. I know. For the first time, genuine pain crossed Nerys's face. And I would make the same choice again. Because you're alive. Because the conspirators are exposed. Because peace has a chance. At what cost? Lyron asked. Nerys looked at her daughter for a long moment. Everything I hoped you would never have to pay. She left without another word. The door closed behind her with terrible finality. Lyron stood frozen. Carson could see her, fighting for control for the composure bred into her since childhood. Losing. She used me, Lyron whispered. Used us both. Yes. And she was right. It worked. Doesn't make it acceptable. Lyron turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. What do we do? Carson considered. The smart play would be to cooperate. Accept Nerys's logic. Smile for cameras and help build the peace that costs so much. But he was tired of smart plays. We leave, he said. What? This conference? This performance? All of it. Carson swung his legs off the bed, testing his balance. I won't be your mother's chess piece anymore. Carson, I came here to help end a war. Instead, I got shot protecting you from a plot your mother knew about. He met her eyes. I'm done being used. If you leave, the peace talks collapse. Then they collapse. Maybe they were built on sand anyway. Lyron stared at him. You would risk everything, millions of lives. I would stop participating in someone else's game. Carson stood steady despite the pain. Your mother wants symbols. She can find other ones. I'm going home. You don't have a home. Your military thinks you're dead. The truth of it hit harder than the energy bolt had. She was right. He had nowhere to go. No squad. No life to return to. Then I'll find somewhere new, he said quietly. Lyron was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Take me with you. Carson looked at her. What? I'm serious. She stepped closer. I'm tired too. Tired of being a weapon. A tool. A princess who exists to serve the Dominion. Her hands unclenched. Maybe somewhere else I could just be me. Your mother would never allow it. My mother doesn't control everything. Lyron lifted her chin. I choose. Isn't that what you've been saying? That choice matters. He couldn't argue with his own logic. They left the medical bay together. No fanfare, no guards, just 2 people walking away from expectations and duty and the weight of civilizations. It lasted 6 hours. The news hit while they were on a transport heading toward the outer colonies. Neutral territory. Places where neither human nor Caith authority meant much. Breaking bulletin. Treaty Hall bombing threat. Evacuation in progress. 48 hours until the final signing ceremony, and someone had planted enough explosives to vaporize the entire facility. Carson watched the footage on a cracked screen. Saw delegates fleeing. Saw security teams searching desperately. Saw the timer counting down visible in leaked surveillance footage. 36 hours. 35, 34. We should keep going, Lyron said, but her voice carried no conviction. Carson thought about the delegates. Humans in Caith who'd worked for months toward peace. Thought about the guards, the staff, the hundreds of people who'd done nothing except try to build something better. Thought about 17 soldiers who died because he wasn't there to save them. I can't, he said. Carson, I know what you're going to say. He stood. That it's not our responsibility. That we don't owe them anything. That walking away was the right choice. Yes. And you're right about all of it. He looked at her. But I can't watch people die when maybe possibly I could have helped. Understanding dawned in Lyron's eyes. You're going back. I am. It's a trap, obviously a trap. Whoever planted that bomb wants someone to try disarming it. Probably. Carson grabbed his jacket. But I'm pretty good with traps. Lyron grabbed his arm. Her grip was strong. Don't, please. You barely survived the last assassination attempt. I know. You could die. I know that too. Then why, her voice broke, why throw your life away for people who used you? Carson covered her hand with his. Because giving up means they win. And I don't let them win. He pulled away gently, headed toward the transport controls to change course. Lyron stood still for a moment. Then she followed. If you're going, she said, I'm coming with you. Lyron, don't argue. We've established I'm faster, stronger, and significantly harder to kill. She moved to the co-pilot seat. Besides, you'll need someone to watch your back. This isn't your fight. You made it mine when you took that energy bolt. Her fingers flew over controls, rerouting them back toward the conference facility. When you jumped in front of me like an idiot. I notice you keep calling me an idiot because you keep earning it. But her voice was soft. Carson, yeah, thank you for coming back. They reached the treaty facility 18 hours before detonation. The place was a ghost town. Security had evacuated everyone within 10 kilometers. Only the bomb squad remained, and they weren't having any luck. Carson and Lyron slipped in through maintenance tunnels. His engineering access code still worked. Small mercy. They found the bomb in the main conference hall. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Caith and human technology merged into something neither side could have built alone. Crystal matrix housing around human plasma cores. Energy conduits feeding into conventional explosives. Sophisticated, Lyron murmured. Elegant. Carson circled it slowly. And completely insane. This thing would crack the asteroid's core, probably destabilize half the sector. Can you disarm it? He examined the connections, traced power flows, mapped redundancies. Maybe, if I had a week and full engineering support. We have 17 hours. Then no. Lyron pulled out a communication device. I'm calling for help. Wait, Carson held up a hand. Look at this. He pointed to the trigger mechanism. 2 separate systems. One human, one Caith, both linked to a single countdown. It's a dead man's switch, he said slowly. Sort of. You can't just cut power or disable one side. They're synced. If one goes offline, the other triggers immediately. Meaning it needs to be disarmed from both sides simultaneously, perfectly synchronized. He looked at her. Human and Caith working together, just like the assassination attempt. A message, Lyron said, showing that cooperation is possible, even in destruction. Or showing it's impossible, that we'll fail and die trying. They were quiet for a moment. The countdown ticked. 16 hours, 58 minutes. Can we do it? Lyron asked. Carson studied the mechanisms. The timing would have to be perfect, down to milliseconds. And I'd need to handle the human side while you handled Caith. Different protocols, different systems. But possible, theoretically. I've noticed humans use that word when they mean probably going to explode. Despite everything, Carson smiled. You're learning. Lyron moved to the Caith side of the device. What do we do? They spent the next 14 hours mapping every circuit, every failsafe, every possible point of failure. Carson explained human engineering principles. Lyron demonstrated Caith resonance theory. They argued about approaches, debated solutions, gradually built a plan that might possibly theoretically work. 3 hours before detonation, they were ready. On my mark, Carson said. His hands hovered over the human trigger assembly. 3, 2, 1. They moved together. Carson's fingers flew across the control interface, disabling safeties in precise sequence. Lyron's hands glowed with telepathic energy, manipulating the crystal matrix with thought alone. The device screamed. Warning lights blazed. The countdown accelerated. It's adapting, Lyron shouted. The system knows we're trying to disarm it. Then we adapt faster. Carson rerouted power flows, burning through emergency protocols faster than safety regulations allowed. Match my rhythm. When I disable human failsafes, you disable Caith ones. Synchronized. I can't read your mind. Then read my body language. You're telepathic. Lyron's eyes widened. That's actually brilliant. She reached out with her mind. Carson felt it, a presence at the edge of his thoughts. Not invasive, supportive. Like someone standing at his shoulder. Now, he said. They moved as one. His hands, her telepathy, human ingenuity and Caith precision merging into something neither could achieve alone. The countdown stuttered, froze. The device hummed, caught between detonation and disarm. Almost there, Carson breathed. Final sequence, 3 subsystems. We need to disable them in perfect synchronization or the whole thing goes. I'm ready. On 3, 1. 2. The door exploded inward. Armed figures stormed the hall. Same mix as before. Human and Caith extremists. Weapons aimed. Step away from the device, the leader ordered. Human. Military gear. Dead eyes. Let it finish. Carson didn't move. Can't do that. Then you die here. Probably. Carson's hands stayed on the controls. But I'm disarming this bomb first. Lyron stepped between Carson and the guns. Her hands glowed brighter. You'll have to go through me. The leader laughed. Princess, we have 12 soldiers. You have telepathy. Mathematics says you lose. Mathematics, Lyron said coldly, is about to learn a lesson. She moved like liquid lightning. Her telepathic shield flared, deflecting the first volley. She was across the distance in heartbeats, disarming 2 soldiers with brutal efficiency. The others tried to adjust. Too slow. But she couldn't maintain the telepathic connection and fight. Carson felt it break. Lyron, he shouted, I need you here. She spun, planted a boot in one attacker's chest, sent another stumbling, made it back to the device. How long? 90 seconds, but I can't do it without synchronization. Then we synchronize. She placed her hands back on the Caith controls. Blood dripped from a cut on her temple. Ignore them. Focus on me. The attackers were regrouping. Weapons aimed. No more warning shots. Carson forced everything else away. The guns, the danger, the fear, focused on Lyron, on the rhythm of her breathing, the tension in her shoulders, the micro-expressions that telegraphed her movements. And deeper, that telepathic presence hovering at the edge of his mind. He let her in. The connection snapped into place. Not reading thoughts. Not invasion, just unity. 2 minds working as one. He knew when she would move before she moved. She anticipated his next action before he took it. Now, they said together, final sequence. 3 subsystems, disabled in perfect harmony, human and Caith, separate but synchronized. The bomb went silent. The countdown stopped at 0001. 1 second. They'd done it with 1 second to spare. The attackers opened fire. Lyron's shield was faster. Energy bolts splashed against telepathic barriers. She held it, grimacing with effort. Carson, leave. Not without you. I can hold them. You need to. Security forces burst in from 3 entrances. Real security this time. Overwhelming force. The attackers went down under stun weapons and restraint fields. It was over in seconds. Carson sagged against the disabled bomb. His hands were shaking. Lyron released her shield and nearly collapsed. He caught her. They leaned against each other, exhausted alive. We did it, she whispered. We did. Carson. Yeah. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Blood on her face, bruises forming. Still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I felt your mind during the synchronization. I know. You could have died several times. You knew it, and you came anyway. Yes. Why? Carson reached up, gently wiped blood from her temple. Because watching you die wasn't an option. That's not logical. No, it's not. Lyron's eyes searched his. I think I'm beginning to understand humans. What's that? You're all completely insane. She smiled. It's not terrible. Then she kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't soft. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like blood and victory. Carson's hands found her waist. Her fingers tangled in his hair. For one perfect moment, nothing else existed. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Carson saw security teams trying very hard to look anywhere else. That was, he started. Overdue, Lyron finished. Come on, my mother will be here soon, and I suspect we have a conversation to finish. Queen Nery arrived with an entire fleet, apparently almost losing her daughter, and the peace treaty warranted dramatic entrances. They met in the treaty hall, surrounded by the disabled bomb and evidence of the conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone had admitted. Nery looked between her daughter and Carson, took in the blood, the bruises, the way they stood close together. You disarmed it, she said. Yes, Carson replied. Alone, together, Lyron corrected. Human and Caith, synchronized. Nery was quiet for a long moment. The conspirators have been arrested. All of them. Both our governments are unstable. Many in positions of power were compromised. Good, Lyron said flatly. Let them burn. Daughter, no. Lyron stepped forward. I'm done, Mother. Done being a tool, a weapon, a symbol you deploy when convenient. You are a princess. Duty requires, choice requires. Carson interrupted. You said it yourself. Strength through will, not obligation. Nery turned her ancient gaze on him. You dare? Yes. He moved to stand beside Lyron. I dare. Because I'm done with commands too. You wanted to test us, fine. We passed. We survived assassination attempts, saved your treaty, proved cooperation works. And now, Neris asked, now we choose. Lyron took Carson's hand. Not because you commanded it, not for political advantage. We choose each other. Freely. The silence stretched. Neris looked at their joined hands, at the determination in their faces. Finally, she sighed. It made her seem for the first time old. Very well, she said quietly. I withdraw my command. The marriage decree is void. Carson blinked. Just like that. Not just like that. Neris moved closer. I have spent 5 centuries learning when to push and when to yield. This requires yielding. She looked at Lyron directly. I offer you a choice, daughter, both of you. Choose your own path, together or apart, with my blessing or without it. But choose freely. Lyron's grip on Carson's hand tightened. And if our choice displeases you, then I will learn to accept disappointment. A ghost of a smile. I suspect I'll survive. The treaty was signed 3 days later, both sides shaken by the conspiracy, both determined to build something better. Carson stood beside Lyron during the ceremony, not as symbols, as themselves. When it ended, Neris approached them privately. I have a proposal, not a command, a proposal. We're listening, Carson said cautiously. Joint Human Caith Task Force, hunting down remaining warmonger cells, protecting the peace we've all paid for. She looked between them. Co-commanders, equal authority, 6-month trial. Lyron glanced at Carson. What do you think? I think, he said slowly, that it sounds like work worth doing. Together. Together, Lyron echoed. Then to her mother, we accept, on our terms. Of course. Neris actually smiled. I would expect nothing less. 6 months later, the task force had become permanent. Carson and Lyron hunted conspirators across 3 star systems, saved colonies, prevented attacks, built trust between species 1 mission at a time. They married on the anniversary of the treaty signing, human ceremony and Caith ritual combined. Neris attended standing beside human admirals who'd once called for Carson's execution. The reception was held on Kalios in gardens that had bloomed for 1,000 years. Carson stood in formal attire, human, and Caith merged watching his bride approach. Lyron wore traditional warrior regalia adapted for ceremony, silver and blue. Energy circuits traced patterns across the fabric. Her hair was bound with crystals that caught starlight. She was perfect. Nervous? She asked when she reached him. Terrified. Good. She took his hands. Means this matters. The ceremony was brief, words in 2 languages, promises that went deeper than duty. When the officiant pronounced them married, Lyron kissed him like she had in the treaty hall. Fierce, uncompromising, real. The crowd erupted in cheers, human and Caith celebrating together. Later, as the twin suns set and the party continued, Carson and Lyron stood at the garden's edge, alone for the first time all day. 6 months ago, I was a prisoner, Carson said, expecting execution. 6 months ago, I was a weapon, Lyron replied, expecting to die in battle. And now, she leaned into him, now I'm married to an infuriating human who can't follow orders and keeps almost dying. You forgot stubborn. That too, she smiled. Carson, yeah, thank you. For what? For saying no. She looked up at him. For choosing me, not because anyone commanded it, because you wanted to. Carson kissed her forehead. Best choice I ever made. A communication device chimed. Lyron pulled it out, checked the message, groaned. Distress signal, unknown sector, possible warmonger activity. Of course there is. Carson straightened. How far? 3 days at maximum speed. He looked at the party, at the guests celebrating peace, at the life they'd built from ashes and stubbornness in choice. What do you think? And he asked. Lyron smiled, that fierce, sharp smile he'd first seen in a throne room when she'd refused to accept anyone's command. I think, she said, that someone needs our help. Then we go. Together, always together. They slipped away from their own wedding reception, headed toward the stars, toward danger, toward whatever came next. Behind them, Queen Neris watched from a balcony. An advisor approached. Should we stop them? Your Majesty, Neris smiled, genuine, proud. No, let them go. They've earned their freedom. But the protocol, they are the protocol now. She turned away. A choice made freely is stronger than 1,000 commands. My daughter taught me that. And the human, Nery said quietly, taught her to choose. High above Kelios, a ship broke orbit, small, fast, crewed by two people who'd refused everything the galaxy offered and chosen each other instead. Carson Drake and Lyron of Kelios. Engineer and princess. Human and Caith. Partners. The stars stretched ahead, infinite and dangerous and full of possibility. They flew toward them without hesitation. Because that's what you did when you had someone worth flying toward. That's what you did when you chose. And choice, they'd learned, was the most powerful thing in the universe.